Okay, the first things I set on a Nikon Z camera. I just received this Nikon Z30 from our friends at B&H. Thank you, B&H. We get to play with it for Z30 days. Okay, the first thing I do when I get a brand new Nikon Z camera is, of course, set my date and the language, and you could do that. You don't need me for that. Then I go to the first icon, the camera icon, and the first thing I do is I change the file naming to the Z camera that I am using. This is great for locating files and identifying pictures without knowing which camera took it. Next, I choose the image quality, and this depends if the camera is the first times I'm using the camera or if I'm experienced with it. If after I get experience with what the RAW files are doing and the JPEGs are doing, I will just shoot RAW. With the Z30, I have it to, whoa, my bread is done. Okay, sorry, I was baking some bread while talking to you, but a little bit of a baker myself. All right, for auto ISO, now when I shoot events, I set my ISO to what I want because I'm in control. But every now and then I will, if I'm walking around or shooting photographs, I will shoot in auto ISO, and I want to set a ceiling, a limit. I don't want the camera to sort of be so aggressive that it picks the highest ISO. Even though it's great in low light, I prefer a lower ISO. So I will turn auto ISO control to on. I'll set my maximum sensitivity to 6400. And then since I'm usually using auto ISO as a walk around travel, I like to stop motion. And so I pick a shutter speed of about 320 or 2/50th of a second, something like that. All right, let me talk about my autofocus settings. So for focus settings, I am shooting the camera in continuous focus mode. That is usually what I will full-time shoot the camera at, unless it's super low light. If it's very low light, I will then switch to single focus point and try to find some contrast. I'll get to that maybe a little bit later or in another video about the best ways to focus this camera. That should probably be a separate video, actually. Let's stick to settings. Now the camera has a lot of different focus modes, but the next thing I usually do is I jump into the menu and I limit them. When I'm at an event, I don't want to cycle through all the different focus modes, so it's great that you can turn some of them off. For example, like pinpoint is just a little too tiny and I never use it, so that one I turn off. Now you may prefer to limit all these options just to one, but I actually find that they are useful in different situations. And I'll probably talk about that in a future video, the best way to focus with your Z cameras. Now just real quick, I'm talking about Z50, Z30, Z6, Z7, 1 and 2. The Z9 may be a little different, so if I ever try that camera, I will update this video. I also don't photograph animals often, so I'll turn that off. So the main ones I have are a small single focus point, so I can shoot between people. I have the very general square, which works great, could be moved around, could also be quickly centered because my little joystick here, if I push it, the focus point goes back to the middle. I also use the wide with a face detection set. That's my favorite for portraits and for groups of people. I just put that wide face detection on who I need to photograph. And then sometimes I use the wide, if I'm photographing one person, I usually use the full wide with face and eye. I don't use auto area wide, I don't use any of the animal settings, and I turn pinpoint and dynamic off. Now there's a couple of options I prefer in the custom controls menu. This has to do with buttons and dials and how things work. So let me tell you how the camera works first, and then I'll show you how to change it, because you may not want to do what I do. The first thing is, for shutter speed, my whole life has always been the front dial since I was originally a Canon shooter. But on Nikon, the back rear dial is the shutter. So the first thing I want to do is I want to reverse those. I want the back to be aperture, because on Canon it was also my thumb would change the aperture. And I want my shutter to be the front. Okay, that's just a muscle memory thing. You may want to leave it as default if you've always shot with a Nikon or whatever. Now on the front two function buttons, the top function button for me becomes the little tracking box. So if I'm in wide zone and all of a sudden I want to photograph an object, I just press the top button and I get the little tracking square. And the bottom one is a awesome little hack that I learned. I can't remember where I learned it, but since I live full-time in continuous and in lower light or in a confusing backlit situation, sometimes the camera can get confused. The bottom button acts as the zoom. And I set that for the zoom because the cool hack is if you're in continuous mode, as soon as you zoom in, the camera automatically acts as if it's in single instead of continuous focus. You zoom in, you can focus, get even confirmation that the thing is focused, the object, and then if you push it again, it zooms back out and you're focused. So it's a great way to sort of have a single focus hack in the heat of the moment. To switch between focus modes easily, the first thing is the movie record button during stills photography is the focus mode AF area mode switcher. And I have it that you can hold it down and then flip the rear dial. Now by default, it's hold down that and turn the front dial, which is actually kind of tough to do. And I was doing that for a long time until I learned somewhere that you can flip the option to actually hold down and switch the dial. Now there's also an option if you don't want to hold down the record button and then flip through your autofocus settings, there's an option where you can sort of just touch the button and then make your changes. But I found that holding and switching and letting go is better for me. But practice both and see which one works better for you. So not only did I reverse the dials for exposure, I also reversed the dials for autofocus settings. Now to make the autofocus as quick as possible, I've made all the options be super fast. So under the A3 menu, I've changed the focus tracking lock on to be quick. For AF activation, I have the back button focus, AF on. I do not focus with the shutter, so I turn that off. Low light autofocus, I turn that off because if it's low light, the camera will actually slow down to try to focus. So I'd rather give the camera help, like an LCD light or some kind of beam or something, instead of the camera entering low light autofocus. The built-in AF illuminator, I usually turn that or keep that on, even though it's annoying at events, because since I shoot in continuous, it doesn't work in continuous. And if I'm switching to AFS single, that means I really need help. So I don't mind the little green light coming on in very dark situations. Power off delay. The camera by default turns off after like half a second. So I go to power off delay. The standby timer I set to 5 minutes. Another good setting for event photography and low light photography is not to use the real live view exposure. If you go to the D menu, turn live view exposure off. You actually then shoot the camera like a DSLR where the back is just lit up. This allows your camera to focus a little quicker. In the bracketing flash menu, since I shoot flash, the first one for flash sync speed, I will set to auto, and this allows me to shoot in high speed sync, where you shoot flash that is above the sync speed. So by default, that's not turned on, so you have to turn that on. All right, let me know if that was helpful, and I could maybe make some more Nikon Z videos for you. I'll see you next time.